Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Total Podcast with me, your host, Phil Scott. On this episode of the Total Podcast, I have a very special guest. She is a mystery writer. She's written a series of interesting mystery novels. Her name is T.G. Campbell, and her books are the Bow Street Society series. So without further delay, here is TG. So, TG, thank you so very much for coming on the podcast today. I very, very, very much appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's been great to be here.
Thank you. Well, first of all, before we get started on your series of novels, tell us a little bit about your background, where you were born, where you went to school, where you grew up, and that kind of thing, and what got you interested in writing.
Okay, so I was born in a city called Milton Keynes, which is about half an hour away from London. It was quite a new city when I was born, but I've got two older sisters and two younger brothers. And my two older sisters were born outside of Milton Keynes, but the hospital in Milton Keynes was open in the March, and I was then born in the October. So I was one of the first babies born in the hospital. I went to school, I think, in Milton Keynes, and then I went to university at University of Winchester to study English studies. And I currently work in local government as administrator, but I have previously worked for not-for-profit organisations, including the Witness Service, which is a charity that help people through the process of giving evidence to court. And in terms of what got me to writing, so growing up, I always loved watching TV, like crime dramas, like The Bill, like Agatha Christie's Poirot, Jenna Pascoe Taggart. It was very much a family affair. Me, my siblings, and my mum would always like sit and watch these programs. And I always wanted to then become a police officer based upon that. I wanted to be in CID, cracking on the cases. But fortunately, because I have a degenerative eye condition, means I can't actually join the police. So I thought, well, the next best thing is to actually write about the police. So my first writing project was a sort of cozy murder mystery set off in between the two world wars in a fictional village. It was a very sort of short novella, but I wrote that for my friend's 60th birthday just to see if I could do it. It was very much based upon the clue puzzle classical blueprint. And that's where it all started, really.
Now, tell me, what inspired you to write so many novels in the series? Because you're 7 books in, correct?
7 books, 7 out of 10, yeah.
Oh, 7 out of 10. Wow. So it's meant to be 10 books.
Yes, it's going to be 10 books. Yeah,
Oh,
everybody knows that the Pip series know that there's only going to be 10 books. So they're starting to get nervous now because thinking, oh, 10 books, who's going to get killed off? But yeah.
well, tell me about your dissertation because you wrote your dissertation on Agatha Christie and what impact has she had on you as a writer?
So growing up, I sort of read sort of point horror, and then I wanted to sort of move on from that. And my mum said, "Oh, why don't you just like read Agatha Christie books?" And so I started reading her books, and then I was actually in the library. I think there was a school library or a library near me, and it had H.R.F. Keating's writing crime fiction book. And in there was a chapter called The Classical Blueprint, and it shows you step by step how to structure your story so that it's like an Agatha Christie sort of mystery. So it tells you how to close off the circle of suspects, how to do the clues, how to do red herrings, that sort of thing. And so that's why I ended up then doing that story for my friend's 60th birthday to see if I could do it. And throughout university, I loved Agatha Christie anyway, but I was actually very fortunate that when I was at university, my degree was the only degree in the country at that time who actually had crime fiction as a module. So as part of that, we studied also Raymond Chandler, G.K. Chesterton, obviously Edgar Allan Poe, sort of the very early sort of crime fiction. And so that's why I was able to do my dissertation on Agatha Christie. And it was, yeah, the social and cultural importance of the work of Agatha Christie. The problem with that was there wasn't much critical essays to actually sort of focus on that. So I had to do 3 essays with part of that. So one was like to do with gender roles, one was to do with class roles, and I sort of compare the different books. And then the last essay was about her serious work, she called it, as Mary Westmacott, Absent in the Spring. And so when I had to sort of do the critical side of things, very sort of obscure quotations about just crime fiction in general, really. But that was really interesting to actually try to dissect Agatha Christie and sort of have sort of, obviously crime fiction back then was very much reassurance fiction. I think, no matter how dark it gets, there's always going to be a detective there who will solve things and everything lovely in the end. So I sort of went from the standpoint that Hercule Poirot is sort of like a guardian sort of the norm. So that's the stance I went from. So in like Death in the Nile, so like the culprit and the murderer and his accomplice, they sort of step away from like normal like gender roles, and so Poirot is there to sort of step in and basically, solve the case and therefore like restore normality. So it was interesting to do that. And yeah, Agatha Christie it herself, it's just a skill in actually making the story itself into the puzzle, and that's always just fascinated me. And that it's not just a matter of just doing the characters and doing the conflict; it's also having that narrative that the reader can follow and actually have a chance to solve themselves as well. And it's a very fine line to be able to sort of not only put the red herrings in, but also do it so that the reader can actually have a chance to actually solve it themselves by end as well. So
When you're writing your series of novels, do you go into each one like you already know it's going to be 10 books? So do
yes.
you have a plan inside of your head as to what general direction you want each story to go? Or does it kind of evolve as you're writing?
So when I wrote the first book, The Case of the Curious Client, it was just going to be an open-ended series at that point. And it wasn't until I got to the end of the book where, because throughout the first book, Miss Trent, who is the clerk of the society, meets with a mysterious man who smokes a pipe, and you think, who is this man? It's not until the end of the book, the last line of the book, it turns out he's a chief inspector of the police. And I thought, that's an interesting, like sort of revelation. And so that from that, it then evolved the plot line of, well, actually, he's the true founder of society. And Miss Trent and another police officer, Inspector Conway, are the only ones who know that fact. So Chief Inspector Jones is very much a hidden sort of anomaly, like a hidden aspect in the society. Even the members don't know that he's actually the true founder. So that conspiracy plot line runs throughout this whole series. So while Miss Trent and Inspector Conway are trying to safeguard his true identity, you then got two other police officers who are then at the same time trying to find out who her mysterious employer is. That's why I decided that it was just going to be just 10 books, because it had to be a point where that plot line had to end. So in terms of that sort of side of things, it sort of did evolve because I wanted to gradually introduce the other two police characters. I didn't want to just like have them from the beginning. So Inspector Wolf comes in at book 2 when the society involved in a Oxford Street mystery, and then Inspector Lee comes in book 3 to do a cold case. And at the end of book 3, Wolf and Lee decide to join forces together against the society. Because what I wanted to do as well with the police was try to have it so that they're not like, oh, come in, here's the crime scene, here's the body, knock yourself out. What went to very much like they needed to be capable themselves, because they're senior police officers. They would have some skills and knowledge to have to got where they were.
Yes.
And so, that itself sort of evolved, and they don't really like each other. So that relationship itself has also evolved. And then you have the different character plot lines. You've got Mr. Locke, who's an illusionist slash gentleman thief, who's also a heroin addict. So his wife is a doctor. So initially she's supplying him, but then she then gradually helps him get off of that. And then you've got a will they, won't they romance. With the romance was not intended. It was in the first book, the gentleman in the sort of the will they, won't romance, he touched the hand of the lady, and I think, okay, then we're doing that now, are we? Okay, so but also I think with it evolves the research as well, because they are set in 1896, 1897 London. So they have to evolve with the research. And even on book 10, in terms of the actual in-book timeline, we were only just over a year. It's only actually been over a year in the actual series.
Wow.
So you've also got to take into consideration the seasons and the passage of time, and it's that sort of thing. So I do have a plot plan. I always plan all my books, and obviously each book has its own standalone mystery, and you have the plot lines that run throughout. But I don't actually know exactly what's going to happen in book 10. So I'm currently near the ending of getting to the end of book 8, and then I'll then have to plan book 9. I've got a rough plan for book 9. I just need to just go back and plan it properly, and then I'll then plan book 10. But yes, it's because you've got to also ramp up the drama, and certain things have to be resolved, because a lot of conspiracies, a lot of like, certain people know certain things, some people don't, and it's you've got to sort of actually the two police officer characters put a mole into society. They've got a spy in there.
Wow.
So everybody's like, oh, how's that gonna like resolve itself and stuff like that, really. So yeah, it's It's a lot of planning.
I'll bet.
Yeah.
So, so do you plan on having book 8 done this year or next year or
Yes.
how? So this year.
Yeah, this year, yeah. So I normally aim to have one full length book and a short story collection out per year. So, because I have a series of short story collections called the Boasted Society Casebook. So, what I normally do with that is I serialize three of those throughout the year in my newsletter, and then I do write two brand new ones and put them in a collection for Christmas. So, that will be out. I'm also just put final recording stages of the audio book of The Case of the Curious Climb because it's the 10-year anniversary this year since
Wow.
that was first released. So, but that's going to be slightly different. It's going to be more like an audio drama. So, I've got uh, a narrator who's doing all the descriptions and like the speech tags. I've got a Canadian actor to do the Canadian character because you can't imitate the Canadian accent. And I've got a male voice actor doing all the male dialogue, and I've got a couple of females doing all the female dialogue. So when you actually listen to it, you have the different voices of the different characters in your ears.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's
So
awesome.
that's
And
been a lot of fun to do. But the male voice actor, bless him, he's like a man of a thousand voices because we had to change his accents, change his depth, his pitch, and everything. And it's come out really well what he's done. Yeah, he had like over 30 parts to voice for that.
wow. And how
So
long does it generally take to do the voice sections to do that?
it's taken us. We had what we were doing was we were like just doing it for several months. So we would pick a character and he would just do those convert it to a script, you see, and he just did the different dialogues for that particular character. But when you get to like people like Mr. Locke, who's the illusionist, he likes the sound of his own voice, so he literally had whole page speeches. So, but luckily the actor didn't have to memorize it; he could read from the script.
Right.
Um, but yeah, it took a long time. So basically, we did it from like number of scenes, and then we sort of went down to like the people with the least amount of scenes, and obviously bit parts and stuff like that. So when we got to the bit parts, you could then play around with the accents. So you've got like somebody from the northeast, somebody from Liverpool, just because it's just a bit of fun, really, that got to that point. So yeah,
And it must be, I mean, each area has its own kind of tinge in terms
yes,
of the way you speak and everything. It's
yes,
got a slight difference. So you have to be able to master those to be able to make them believable.
yeah. I think also what he found difficult was that you have people who the characters who are sort of from similar areas but slightly different backgrounds. So I said like I gave him a spectrum. So Chief Inspector Jones is from Mayfair, so he's very sort of posh. He's sort of quite well spoken in that sense. Whereas Mr. Locke, he's more posher than that though, because he's a gentleman. You know, he doesn't use contractions. He likes having a voice there. But it was Jones, just well spoken. Then you've got Conway, who's East End of London, rough around the edges, a bit like EastEnders. And then you've got Inspector Wolf, who's a bit East End, but he's also a little bit of Jones. So he's kind of in the middle. So he's got that sort of East End accent, but he's a bit more well spoken. So it's actually I think he found more difficult with the slight differences between characters rather than actually say the Scottish character compared to like the London character.
That's
So
fascinating.
it
Now,
is,
also,
yeah, yeah.
now I wanted to ask you too, you're so busy with all of these. Have you thought about what you're going to write after you finish this series of novels?
So at one point in the series at the moment, so in book 7, the journalist Mr. Maxwell goes off to New York with his brother, and the artist Miss Dexter goes off to Paris with Lady Catherine Alston. So what I'm going to do is a series of spin-offs like beyond the Bow Society. I'm going to have them two are going to have their own joint novel where you find like it's on real time. It's like what's happened to him in New York and what's happened to her in Paris, obviously in 1897. And so that's going to be like one story, and then I'm going to do another one like with the a spiritualist. So he had more of a traditional sort of ghost story. And then with Mr. Locke, I want to do what was a spy type, thriller type, sort of standalone. So they're going to be just sort of different characters, but just playing a little bit more different genres, really. And then I'll want to do possibly a spin-off series with one of the police characters, but that'd be very much more procedural, his life and work away from the Bow Society. So his work and his normal day job is a lot darker, a lot grittier. He's obviously from the East End. He's a former bare knuckle boxer. So it's that sort of other underbelly of London which he has to deal with, which you don't necessarily see in the main series. So I'm really fascinated. He's one of the more popular characters as well. So I think people would really interested to know actually what happens to him beyond the series. So that would continue from the point where book 10 ends, basically.
Interesting. Now, I wanted to
So
ask you too, when you're writing, like you said, it was in that particular frame of time in the late
Yes.
1890s. Do you
Yep.
find it easier to try to keep it within that time frame, or do you find it more challenging that you're keeping it in a specific tight time frame?
It's easier because the research makes it easier because you've got a particular pinpoint to actually know like what you're looking at, what because things change so rapidly in that century that it was
Right.
good to actually have that starting point. Um, but also because things in the story itself they happen so quickly. There's not a lot of time between books really. So like in this one, it's literally so the prologue is sort of happened. The prologue in this book starts immediately after the events of book seven, but then the start of the actual book is only 2 weeks later. So they are quite tight because otherwise you lose that momentum within the story itself, and things always, it's cause and effect. Things happen because of other things. Um, so I think it's a lot easier to keep it in that short window rather than having you don't want to have I don't like having too big a skip between books because otherwise you feel like you've missed something, especially because people say they come back for the characters, and if they feel like they've missed something in their lives, I don't want to feel like they've missed out really. So they literally don't they come back to find out what's going to happen to the characters next.
Now, in terms of publishing, are all of your books self-published?
Yes. So I wrote The Case of the Curious Client knowing that I was going to self-publish. That was my intention from the get-go because I had this idea in mind. I wanted to control the branding, control the marketing, and I made the conscious decision that all my everything is the Bullshit Society rather than me, because people don't know who I am. Do you know what I mean? Who's TG Campbell? But with the Bullshit Society, that's the universe, it's the characters, it's the world, and that's what I made the conscious decision to actually sort of come from that point, that perspective. But also, it gives you a bit more freedom to know that what you decide to put in the story and actually and also you've got the freedom to actually change things as you're writing as well. You're not sticking to that rigid plot synopsis basically or plot plan, because quite often obviously I have beta readers who will read the book after I've finished with it and they'll come with some really really good points and they really help me lift the book to the next level. And I think I might not be able to do that if I'm traditionally published. Obviously, sometimes you can, but not always. So I do like that freedom.
Now, I bet that's way more and way more easier in terms of having to do that yourself and just saying, yeah,
Yeah,
you know what, I want to change this, as opposed
yeah,
to being locked down to a publisher saying, oh, no, you can't do that, or no, your book should go
yeah.
in this direction.
I
So,
mean, I
so
do have a
having,
yeah, I do have an editor as well who will edit the book as well. So obviously, I have to pay for that.
right.
Whereas obviously, publishers you wouldn't necessarily have to do that because they have in-house book editors. But yeah, it's to be able to change things. It's a lot better.
Now, tell me also about your eye condition, how it's affected your life, and how it affects your work in terms of your writing, if at all, and how have you adapted over the years?
So I was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa when I was quite young, very young. And it's unusual that me and my two sisters all have the same eye condition. And when we were first diagnosed, the scientific thought process was that girls carried it and boys developed it. So had three girls in one family was very, very, very unusual. So we actually took part in the research into the condition. So there's a case study somewhere with us three in it. Um, and so because I've always had it, it's something that's always been in the background. Obviously, as I've got older, so originally when I was younger, I could pick up a book without having to have reading glasses, just read it straight off. But as I've got older, I've had to have reading glasses, and then if especially books now are such small font, I've got to have a magnifying glass as well for that. So we work on the computer. It's obviously it's larger font. It's high contrast. But what I decided, I made a conscious decision when the case of the curious client was that I wanted to sort of draw upon my own experience as being somebody who's visually impaired. So Thaddeus Dorsey, who is the client in the case of the curious client, he has macular degeneration. And because of that, he then suffers from what's sort of colloquially known as Charles Bonnet syndrome. So he has hallucinations because that's what happens when you have visual impairment, is that your brain fills in the gaps basically. And people have said that they see colours or they've seen like people and they see hallucinations. But I thought putting that in the 1890s context is even more interesting because how would they have dealt with that? And it was interesting talking to like the Royal Society of Opticians, and he said basically that back then that would have been seen as a pseudoscience. So they wouldn't necessarily have understood all about eye conditions, that sort of thing. And
Right.
because he is seeing hallucinations, they think he must be mad. but also because he's more wealthy, he doesn't have to go into an asylum. He can have an attendant at home, and that's the arrangement he's got. He's got an attendant who looks after him in his home, because they think that he's mad. Um, so from that point of view, it was like really interesting to sort of like look at it through that lens. But I was also sort of showing how he's had to deal with. He was quite a successful lawyer, had a very successful firm, but because his eyesight started to go and he didn't want to admit that, he got a legion of clerks, which then added to his financial woes, and his brothers had to step in, and he had this attendant and everything. So that's how the mystery ends up coming about. I think one of the highest compliment I think probably had from that book was that somebody actually emailed me and said, as a visually impaired person, I really liked your book because it was a realistic representation of somebody who is severely visually impaired. So I thought, yeah, I've
Wow.
done my job there. Yeah. So
Wow, that's amazing. Now,
yeah,
tell me about a typical day for you because different writers have different styles and how they're able to set up their day in terms of writing and their frequency of writing. What's a
yeah.
typical day like for you when you're writing?
So I work part time as well. I was working in local government as well as doing my writing. So I generally just write when I can. I always think just get something done. If it's research or, um, doing a scene or a few lines, whatever. So I don't track my word count. I track scenes and and have each chapter in a separate file. And I edit as I go along, which everybody says, no, don't do that. I've tried the whole write the whole draft, then go back and edit method. No, that's just too overwhelming for me. So I'll write a scene, go back and edit it until I'm happy with it, and then write the next one, which actually ends up being quicker for me because then all the little problems are dealt with at that point. Then you do a full edit at the end for the bigger things. Um, so to expose today, I'm thinking, right, I need somewhere, right, one of the like the suspects is going to be interviewed at his home. Right, so where am I going to put him? Right, go into line, Booth, Charles Booth's poverty maps. Right, his working class. Right, let's look where he would be and look at professions. Okay, right, he's a plumber. Okay, so plumbers generally were in near Loughborough Junction train station. Look at Charles Booth's poverty maps. Okay, East Lake Road. Okay, got that. Right. Now, what does East Lake Road look like? Okay, look on Google Maps. Look on. There's actually London Picture Archive's got like contemporary, like old photographs of streets and like houses. Look at those, and then sort of think, right. So how is my character going to get there? Okay, so I've got Mr. Snyder, who's a cabman. He knows all about London, how to get there. Right. So Bradshaw's Railway Guide, how they get to Bow Street over to there. Sort of, join those dots. So then basically decided, okay, so he went from Bow Street in a hired cab because he left his cab at home, hired cab to Ludgate Hill on the train to Loughborough Junction, short walk from there to East Lake Road, where he meets Mr. Skinner, who is the firearms expert, but also a bit of a tough guy himself, because this guy that they've got into question is a bit known to be quite volatile. So them two have just met, now they're going to go off and they're going to question this guy. So in order to actually get to that opening paragraph of actually them where the character is going to be, how they get there, it's more because Mr. Snyder is so au fait with the transport links and everything that I like to say how we get to places, because normally he'd be driving the cab, but he decided I can't drive the cab because I can't leave the cab outside while I'm inside because you can get nicked. The same as obviously horses, like cars, with a very high value. So he has to think about that ahead of that. So and he meets Mr. Skinner there, and then they go off to question the suspect.
I really like how you're able to weave your own life and your own disabilities and your own experiences into your stories because I think that makes it even more personal
Yeah,
and
yeah,
more connecting, not only
yeah,
for you, but for your readers as well.
yes. I do like to sort of try to challenge stereotypes with my books. So, for example, there's a female doctor, which people think, oh, women could be doctors back in the 1890s. Well, they could. They weren't necessarily as accepted as male doctors, but they could be qualified. So they could get a qualification. So she's a qualified doctor. You've got Mr. Skinner has only got one hand because he was in the Royal Navy and he had to leave there because he had an accident with a cannon. And basically, he's then now professional bodyguard for a former captain of one of his ships. So, but because he's like knows about guns and that sort of thing. That's why he's recruited. But his disability is not something that defines him, it's just something that's part of who he is. So when I did the one about the case of Puga's Ploy about boxing, I thought, you know what, they needed somebody to send undercover. And in the Royal Navy, sailors would often be initiated through bare knuckle boxing. So he had a knowledge of bare knuckle boxing. So, well, you know what, I'm gonna have them send him in, even though he's only got one arm, one hand. I thought, yeah, they're gonna send him in, and actually that's what they do. So that doesn't hold him back. And you've got a few. So Miss Trent herself is bisexual. Then you've got a Mr. Elliot who is homosexual. Obviously, back then homosexuality for men was highly illegal, highly sort of frowned upon. So he's a criminal defence lawyer though. So he obviously has to sort of be very careful of how he sort of expresses himself and that sort of thing. So again, it's those sort of aspects. Um, and then from the short stories, I've recently introduced a Jamaican character. So he again started out with in the Navy. Then he's left the Royal Navy because he didn't like it. And basically, he's a self-taught botanist. So he's now got the knowledge of botany. So he ended up going to Kew Gardens with Mr. Skinner to determine why these particular plants are being stolen. And so, I'm going to bring him into the main series before the end of the series. But yeah, so what I'm trying to do with the Bow Society is try to reflect society at large, and as everybody, because they are there to represent people, but also to make sure that everybody has access to the justice they deserve, regardless of class, regardless of financial status, regardless of gender. Because quite often back then, sort of police corruption, police brutality, and obviously sometimes if the people who have wealth could buy their own like justice and everything, whereas society very much like if they can't afford to pay, people can't afford to pay them, they're like, don't worry, we have a fund that we can use to subsidise your case. You don't have to worry about paying, basically. So it's all that sort of thing, really. And that's why Chief Inspector Jones set it up, because he saw all this corruption in the police, and he just thought, we need a way to combat that. So that's why and if we can't do a police, because the people are still not going to trust us as the police. So that's why he thought, both society, ordinary people, they can go into older people's homes because people are more trusting of them, and they're more likely to talk to them. And that's why that was the thinking behind society when he set it up.
If you were giving advice to any new writer or someone who was interested in writing novels or any kind of stories, what advice would you give them?
Okay.
And also in publishing as well.
Yeah.
Your experience is self-publishing because a lot of people go that route. And so
Yes.
what would your advice be to anyone asking you for advice about those things?
So in terms of writing, I would say you need to make sure that you get an editor. No matter how good at editing you think you are, it's always best to have another pair of eyes to actually go over your work, because readers can be quite cutthroat, and at the end of the day, they don't know you. You don't know them, they don't know you. So they can be very brutally honest. And there's always going to be a typo. There's always going to be something that's going to fall through the cracks. But as long as you know that when you put that book out, it's the best that it can be, then that's the best you can do, really. So that's something that I learned the hard way, really. As like an indie author. In terms of publishing, what I always say to people is if you're not sure whether self-publishing is for you, whether or not you want to go down the traditional publishing route or self-publishing, I always say to people, well, explore traditional publishing first and then try to get an agent and try to do it that way. So because what I found is agents, publishers are less likely to take you on if you've already been published. They like sort of the unknown, they like to be able to sort of build your brand and sort of do it. And then I think, well, even if that doesn't work out, you've still got self-publishing to fall back on. Whereas if you try to do the other way around, it's a lot harder. So that's something that I would always recommend. And also going back to writing though, I think the biggest thing as well in the actual process itself is trust your own voice and have the confidence in your own voice. Do not over edit something, because people can over edit their book to please everybody else, to please all the feedback they get, and then it loses its soul, it loses its voice. And you need to be very, very careful about tweaking it too much, basically.
Excellent advice. Thank you for that. Now, where can people find your books? I know you have your books on Amazon. Where can
Yeah.
people find the hardback or paperback editions of your book and your social media. Where can people find you on social media?
So currently, more books are just available on Amazon's ebook paperback. So I'm working on the special edition of the audiobook for the Case of Curious Client. But then once we've done that, we will be doing the more traditional sort of audiobooks. I am going to look at sort of expanding my distribution this year to further film. Basically, if you look for Bow Street Society, T.G. Campbell on Amazon, they'll all come up. I have a website, bowstreetsociety.com. I'm also on Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads, Facebook. Again, that's all Bow Street Society. And if you're really interested, there's also have a Bow Street Appreciation Society Facebook group where there's exclusive content in there to have a weekly sort of update from me, Thursday Force. Also, there's character sort of themed posts as well. So you have like Mr. Virgil Brody's Monday Mysteries, tells you about like unsolved mysteries and disappearances. Then you have like Lady Alston's Wednesday Wonders, which is like questions about like general questions about like publishing and stuff, and just to open a debate really, and just other posts in there as well. So yeah,
Yeah, send me those notes and I will definitely put all of those links in the show notes for you.
thank you.
You're welcome. Well, TG, thank you so very much for coming on the show today. I truly appreciate it. What a fascinating series of novels. And I'm sure my listeners and readers can't wait till they get to the 10th book.
Oh
And
yeah.
I mean that sounds awesome. So TG, thank you so very much for taking the time out of your busy day and schedule to do this interview. I truly appreciate it. And it's quite an honor to have you on. So thank you, TG.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, it's been great.
Thank you. All right. With that, everyone, that is the end of this episode of the Total Podcast with me, your host, Phil Scott. Everyone stay safe, be careful out there, take care of one another, and we will talk again soon.